the thread ID, voila, and all of these other metadata, as well as the model that was used, the instructions, all of that was sent along in the response, okay, in the thread. And then, of course, get run's status, because when we hit run, what happens in the backend, things are happening, meaning these steps are going to go to you see, maybe it has to use a code interpreter, create a message, and do all these other things. It's not until all these steps are done, which means an answer, a message, in this case, an answer from our run, okay, our assistant in this case, it's not until then, once that is done, that the message is actually created and sent back. So all of that is happening here, right? This is the log and run step. Let's see what happens first. It has this object here, this data. If I open this data here and keep opening, it has the ID, the object, right? These are the steps, right? In fact, that's exactly what I'm showing you. There's the status, and this is the steps going through the whole process of creating, crafting this message for the assistant message, which is going to be sent, and then we can see the results. All right, let's continue. So you can see it has a JSON here response. It comes in as a list, an object list, and we have the data field, which has an ID, the object, the thread step, a run step, when it was created, and all the great stuff. And continue the other step, and as many steps as possible, and then the status, run status, to tell us whether the running is over. Everything is set up now. We have the response, a message which can be passed back to the assistant, right? So that we can then see. Let's see, continue, completed. You can see here that the status now is completed, which means all is good. We should have a formulated message. Okay, if I go to tools, you can see what tools were used, code interpreter, right? In this case, even though it wasn't really needed, but it's okay. And then get runs. You can see now it returns data, which has an ID, has an object, and the status and everything. And then we go to the message response. Now comes in as object list and the data there. And you can see now we have the ID, the thread message, okay, the first one there. And then this is for the assistant. If you open here, you will see that assistant should have, let me click here to open. There we go. And there we go. We have the actual value, which is exactly this, what you see here. It says to build muscles, or lean muscles, all of that information which we received back. So the assistant in this case went through this whole process that I showed you earlier, and they return the assistant message, in this case back to our thread, which then we can see, in this case we're able to see that the information, the message is here. So this is a very good representation of the assistants and all the building blocks. But this is really cool, the logs, because we can actually see the whole process of what's happening, so we understand exactly what's happening. So it's not this mystery box per se. What we've learned here is that to create an assistant here manually, you have to easily just go to the assistants API or playground, that is, and just hit create, and you have to pass the name of your assistants as well as the instructions, right? So specify what you want your assistants to be good at, or to what knowledge these assistants has to have, right? What they're going to help you with. And then of course that will generate the ID as you see here. And of course, as you create the assistants, you have to, of course, as I showed you, you have to make sure that you attach the right model and the tools that you want to attach to. So what I want you to do is to create, for instance, a code assistant. Okay, so essentially come up with instructions for an assistant that can help you with code issues, right? You can say you are a very helpful Java developer assistant, blah, blah, blah. You're knowledgeable about the basic of Java, intermediate and advanced. And so you help developers to do pair programming, whatever it is, so that, and test it out and see if it works. And make sure, because it's code based, make sure, of course, in this case, you really would need to have this code interpreter, because then you can paste in as a message, user message, a piece of code and ask the assistant if this code will compile, if there's something you can do they can do to improve it, and so forth. So you have some ideas on how this works. Okay, do that and save changes and create the assistant and then test it out and see if it works. All right, go ahead and do that, and I'll see you next. All right, so now we're going to actually do the same thing we did before, but in code, which is very exciting. The first thing we need to do is let's go back to our playground here, Assistant's Playground, log in and everything. And I hope you were able to do that little exercise earlier. If not, well, what can I say? All right, so what we'll do here is we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to be using code, right? So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Yes, I know it's very sad, but you gotta go. Okay, now it's empty. So we're gonna do all that using code. So you should have Visual Studio Code installed or any other IDE that you may use. That's fine. And you should also have Python, everything set up. So everything should be good, right? So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna create a new folder for our project. So personal trainer as such. I'm gonna cd to our personal, should be personal, but persona, that's fine too. Okay, so it's empty there. So I'm gonna say code to open this exec here. Just gonna close that one. And then there we go. So we don't have much going on here. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a new file. Let's call this main.py. There we go. And also I'm gonna go ahead and create, in this case, requirements.txt, requirements.txt, such. This is where we're going to put all of our dependencies and libraries that we need for our Python and for our project, I should say. And next, what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and create a file. This is going to be our environment variable file, so .env. This is where we're going to put our environment variable. So the idea is we're going to have our OpenAI environment variable. Let me close this down. Like that, and we're going to put your OpenAI key. Remember that key that I showed you earlier? So essentially you're going to come here and go to API keys, and if you don't have an API key, go ahead and create one just like I showed earlier, and take that key, and that's what we're going to put inside this here. Okay, so go ahead and do that. And for requirements here, I'm actually going to pass in a few ones. I'm going to say python.env, and I also need OpenAI package like that. Very good. So that's inside of our requirements.txt. I'm going to create another file here called .gitignore. So that's for me to hide a few things once I push this to the repository, GitHub repository, so that you don't have things that you don't need. Okay. So in this case here, I'm going to make sure that our Git, it's going to bypass the environment variable file so that it's not pushed. I'm going to create a Python environment. That way we can run pip install to install everything in this environment specific for this project. To do so, remember I'm on Mac here, in Python 3, and then it's going to be, I'm going to say -m-venv as such, and then the name of the environment. So I'm going to just say my env like that. And what will happen now is just going to go ahead and create, I'm going to say yes, because you notice a new environment has been created. Say yes, I'm going to use that. And you will see now we have this my env with binaries include libraries and everything. This is our Python environment that we can use then to activate it. So to activate it, I'm going to say source my env, and then I'm going to go to binary and then activate. Hit enter. You can see now my env environment is activated. So that's really good, which means then I can say pip install -r and pass the requirements, that text, which has all of these dependencies or packages or libraries that we need. So I'm going to hit enter. So it's going to go ahead and get all that information for us. Okay, so all the packages have been downloaded. That's really good. Let me just clear all out of this. And then now, if you look at my env, of course, you're going to go to binaries. You can see that we have .env, we have OpenAI, which is exactly what we added. Very good. So we should have everything set up now. I'm going to get rid of this. So let's go ahead and do some importing here. So I'm going to import OpenAI library, and I'm going to set up the .env so that we are able to get the environment variables and do all the great stuff. So I have all that information here. I'm just going to copy that and paste in here. Okay, importing find.env, load.env from .env package. All right, and I'm going to call this load.env there, so that it all set up. And then I'm going to create a client here, which we're going to be using. The client's going to be OpenAI.OpenAI as such. Okay, and now with this client, we're going to be able to call the OpenAI API, assistant, and anything else that we want, because we have created that. Now you could have also done something like this, OpenAI, right? And then say .api key, and then go to os.environment.get and pass the OpenAI key, which is the key in this case, the value that we put inside of our environment variable. Okay, so that's another way to do that. But since I'm loading all the environment variable, this seems to work. Just a client OpenAI.OpenAI, and also if you want, you can pass the OpenAI key directly from here, but it seems to work just like this because it gets all the environment variable. If not, just go ahead and add the OpenAI key directly here, or just like what I showed you. Let me just do that again. I'm going to put it here. I'm going to leave it there, all like that. Okay, whatever works for you, go ahead and do that. Or the other way too, I'm going to put it all here. There's another way you could have done. You said client OpenAI, and just like I said, pass the API key and go ahead and do the custom environment variable if you change the names. Okay, but if you are using OpenAI underscore API underscore key, then this should just work as it is. All right, I'm going to leave that there just in case you need that. All right, very good. So next, what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and say model. This is just a variable that we're going to be using. And the model we're going to be using, it's going to be GPT-3 for Turbo. And I'm going to put it here for now. Okay, now we may change this. You may want to use GPT-4 preview depending on situations, but so far so good. Okay, so now that we have everything set up, let's see how can we create, in this case, an assistant. Right? In this case, we're going to create the trainer, the personal trainer assistants. Very simple. All we do, I'm going to just put here, all we do really is just say the assistants. I'm going to say personal. And then I'm going to use our client, right, which has instantiated our OpenAI there. I'm going to say client, and it's going to go to beta. Remember that because as of recording of this video, the assistance API, it's actually in beta, which means they're still working on it. And so maybe by the time you watch this video, you watch this course, maybe you won't need to say beta, which will be great. So just keep that in mind. For now, we just have to go to beta. And then we go to assistants. And once we get to assistants, we go ahead and say create, very conveniently, and then we can pass certain parameters here. Okay, so what parameters do we pass here? Well, first of all, we need to pass the name that we want to name our personal assistant. In this case, I'm going to call this personal trainer as such. And then we pass instructions, which are very, very important, as you remember. And I'm going to pass the instructions here real quick. So these are the same instructions that we used before. So you are the best personal trainer, nutritionist, and you've trained high caliber athletes and movie stars. Okay, there we go. We have all of that information. Let me get rid of that. Don't know where that came from. There we go. All right. And the next thing we need to pass here is the actual model, because we need to remember this is the same thing we've done manually. So now we are passing the model that we're going to be using, or the assistant it's going to be relying on. And it's going to be the model that we pass here. Just put in this variable so it's easier to change in one place. So just like that, we created our assistant. And I can go ahead and say print. In this case, I'm going to say personal trainer dot ID, right? This will give us the actual ID of this personal trainer assistant that we just created. Okay, and I'm going to go and comment that out for now. And the next thing we need to do is to create, yes, the thread, because this is where all of the messages, as you know, will be. So to create a thread, again, you'll see that's very easy. I'm going to say thread and use client again, beta, and I'm going to go ahead and say threads and dot create. Again, for our thread, we need to pass a few things. Now, the cool thing here is that for our thread, we pass the messages, which is going to be a list. So these messages here, I'm going to pass an object. In this case, I'm going to start with the role. Okay, and the role is going to be user. And for the user, in this case, the content is going to be what? Well, I'm going to just put something. I'm going to say, how do I get started working out to lose fat and build muscles? Something like this. So this will be the first message it's going to be sent for as the user. Okay. We could have created a thread with no messages at all and then add those messages later, but we can go ahead and add a message, a user message right away as well. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and print. Actually, let's call this thread ID and get that thread ID. So just thread.id, okay, because those are needed. And I can go ahead and print thread ID as such, so we see. And I can do the same thing here. Assistant ID and personal.id like that. And then here I can just go ahead and when we need, I'm just gonna go like that. Very good. So now that we have these two things, what will happen now if we run this? Well, we are going to be able to create an assistant, right? And also in this case, create a thread and get those IDs, which you will see in a second here. So let's go ahead and run this real quick and see if this works. All right, so I know my environment is active, so I'm going to say Python 3. So make sure on Windows, I think it's just Python. And I'm going to say main.py. And let's go ahead and make sure everything is good, I think. Let's go run. Voila. And you can see that we have our assistant ID because we want to create that assistant ID. We created here, personal trainer, and we're printing it out. And we also have the thread. Let's see if this is correct, because as you saw, we deleted everything in our backend, in our playground. And now if we go back, let's see, let's go to our assistants. We should see our personal trainer assistant, which was created just now. All right. And this ID, 7YT5, you can see 7YT5. That is exactly what we have here. You can see we have that personal trainer name, instructions, and the model that we're using. But that's what we specified and so forth. And internally, we do have a thread, which is this thread here that is ready to be used, which will have a message. So now this is not working. We're not seeing anything right now, but it's okay because we're going to be using that. Okay, so we have our assistant and we have a thread where all the messages are going to be in. And so going back to code here, we understand that if we were to run this again, that would kind of defeat the purpose because we have our assistant created already. So it would go ahead and create yet another assistant, which is not what we want. And this is the reason why in this case here, we were able to get those. In this case here, you can see we have the assistant ID as well the thread ID, which we're going to be using to proceed creating and conversing in this case with our assistant. So what I'm going to do here, I'm copy these two real quick, and I'm going to just go ahead and hard code our IDs so that we can use them. Okay, so I'm going to do like that. So this is going to be assist, put that into variables that we can actually use. Okay, let's not give spaces so we don't run into issues. So now that we have that, we can go ahead and comment all of this out here. Okay, I'm going to leave this as is, so we don't need to, you will have access to all this code anyway. So now we have what we need. So in this case, the assistant ID, when we use that, it's going to be created, right? In this case, we're going to be reference that. In fact, I'm going to move all of this to the bottom here because we already have all of that. So I'm going to also comment this out because we don't need that anymore. So now we have the information that we need, which is the thread ID and the assistant ID because they have been created as you saw in the back end. Okay, so what we'll do next is we're gonna go ahead and create the actual message, another message here, so we can start conversing with our API, assistance API. Say create a message. So I'm going to say message. I'm going to set that to, let's say what are the best exercises for lean muscles and getting strong. That's our message. We're going to then add to the thread. To add to the thread, well, I'm just going to say message again, and I'm going to say client that beta and threads, and I'm going to go to messages, right? And then create, in this case, a message. And for the message, well, in this case here, the thread we need to pass the thread ID, which is going to be the thread ID, and we need to pass the role, which is going to be the user role, right? Because we are conversing, we are asking a question to them. And then the content, in this case, is going to be the message, which we created at the top here. And next, we are going to then run the thread, or in this case, run the assistant. How do we do that? Well, we need to create that entity first to run our assistant. And to do so, I'm going to say run, and then I'm going to use client again, beta, threads, that runs, right? That creates. So we need to create that runs entity, which is attached to the thread. And you can see the beauty here, because we said earlier that run needs to know the assistant ID, that's why we kept it, as well as the thread ID, so that they can get message and added that back to that thread. So in this case, I'm going to pass the thread ID. It's going to be thread ID, and the assistant ID is going to be the assistant ID. And in this case, instructions, we need to pass the instructions for our run. Okay. So in this case, I'm just going to say, please address the user as James Bond. And there we go. So now we have our run here. Now we have to remember that our run has to go through different steps. You could go and find a tool that needs to be able to assist the user well, right? To give the assistant more power, things that it needs to do, right? Go through all the steps that we saw before. You may need to then formulate, of course, that message back, right? It's going to be the assistant message with the result that the user would want to receive. Okay, so that takes time because it's a process. So what we'll do here is I'm going to put together a helper function that will help us deal with the waiting, the stepping that the run has to do before it gets to the result, right? The message is written back, the response, etc. Okay, so for the sake of time here, I do have this wait for run completion. So essentially we're passing the client and passing the thread ID, run ID, and then sleep interval is going to be 5. Now for this to work, I'm going to have to import a few other things here real quick. So because it's going to calculate, in this case, the time, the starting time, and all of that to give that elapsed time. So I'm going to just go ahead and paste in the time, logging, and daytime from daytime. Okay, so these are the packages that we need. So essentially what this is doing here is we're going to wait. So while true, we're going to try. We're going to go ahead and say client threads retrieve. In this case, we're going to pass the thread ID and the run ID. And then it's going to check if run completed at, and it's going to go through and get the elapsed time. We're going to get that, and we're going to subtract. So do all the calculation just to tell us how long this whole process took. It's not necessary, but it's fun to know. And then we're going to print run completed at the formatted elapsed time. And we're going to log that, okay? But most importantly, this is where we're actually going to get the messages, that is, once the run is completed, because that's where also the message that we need, the assistant is going to be spitting out, sent to us. That's where it's going to be, because all of that is going to be put back into the thread. Okay, so what we do here is we go through our threads again. Remember, threads, that's where all the messages are, the user's messages as well as the assistant messages live. We're going to go through that because it's a list, and then we need to pass the thread ID so we can get those messages. That's very important because you could have multiple threads going, right? But on the same assistant. So it's important to understand that we need to pass the actual thread ID so that we know we're looking at the right bucket, in this case, where all the messages are, so we can retrieve all those messages. And then we're going to get the last message, okay, that is there, because that's going to be our response in this case. And then we're going to go to the text and get the value. Okay, this is how we get the response. So the response here is going to go to last, which is the messages, go to content, and then the text and the value. And we're going to retrieve that. And now here, this is where I'm going to actually run by just calling the wait for completion and pass what needs to be passed, which is the client. I'm going to call client. Okay. I could have just, because the names are the same, I could just pass client, but let's just say client like this. And then I'm going to pass the thread ID. It's going to be thread ID. I need to pass what else? It says thread ID, run ID. So run ID, in this case, how do we get the run ID? Well, we know that we have our run here, which is being passed along, right? So we're going to pass that run.id. So I'm going to say run.id. So we get that for this to work. And there we have it. So when we run this, we should see some sort of result. Let's see if this works. I'm going to go ahead and open here. And let's say Python 3 main.py. In your case, if you're Windows, it's going to be something else. Let's run. If all goes well, it will take a little bit because it's thinking. And we should see, once all is done, we should see some results. All right, there we go. Now we have a result. So if you go up here, we can see the run completed in what would be 24 seconds, right? And then the assistant response, well, James Bond, because we told it to refer us as James Bond. When it comes to getting lean and all that stuff, it's essential to focus on a combination of resistance training and cardiovascular exercises. There's squats, deadlifts, bench press, pull-ups, chin-ups, lunges, planks, and all of that great stuff. So we got the response. So you can see that this indeed works, right? And the other thing you can do also here is we noticed earlier that whenever we run something, let's go to test here, you can see that we have logs. So we can actually go and look at all the logs if you want to in code. To do so, I'm going to, in fact, it's going to be the steps, right, of whatever it's happening, all the steps. When we say run, the steps it goes through. So I can do that as well real quick here. To do so, I'm going to say run steps, put in a variable, and I'm going to use client, better again, threads, and runs and steps. Look at that. And then in this case, it's going to come in as a list. So I'm going to say that list, and I'm going to need to pass, again, you guessed it, the thread ID, because it needs to know where I'm getting the steps from, or for in this case, and the run ID, which is going to be run.id. Okay. And remember this run here, it is what we created earlier here. Very important. All right. So what I can do now is I'm going to change the message here, that the user, and I can say, how much water should I drink in a day to get healthier? Okay. There we go. So let's go back and open our terminal. And I'm going to run this again. Okay, so there we go. We have a result here. Took about 15 seconds. And to maintain a good health, James Bond, it's generally recommended to aim for intake of 8 glasses, roughly 2 liters of water per day. However, this is general guideline, blah, 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 and all that information. It's very, very good. Look at this. Stay hydrated, 007. Prioritize your health and well-being. Very cool. Very cool indeed. So this is very exciting. Notice here that now we have this power of creating different assistance APIs, right? And create threads, and different threads actually even within that one assistant API. And we can have all this conversation and get response. So you can see how easy this is. And this is a very simple example. And later I'm going to show you how to create an actual bot, or how to create a bot, a chat bot, where you can go ahead and start chatting, and then the assistant will respond, and you can get information that way as well, which is really interesting. And now you can see the advantages here, right? The advantage is that not only are we just going to come here in the playground and create assistants and having to interact with it here. We can, obviously, but that's not scalable, right? Because we want to build application that will leverage this assistance API. And this, what we're doing here, is indeed it's the leverage that we're given by the assistance API, because now we can use the API, the actual assistant API, to create in code and attach this to a website or any application that we may be building ourselves. And then we can also go steps and look at all the steps, right? In fact, I did not. There we go. So I didn't I didn't print the steps. Let's go ahead and print the steps. Oh, you probably saw that. And I'm going to put inside of F string here, I'm going to say steps and say run steps and that data. That's how you get to the steps data, and then it's a list. Okay, and voila. Okay, let's go ahead and run this again. Of course, it didn't do what I wanted to do because I didn't print it out, but that's okay. Let's give a new message. How many reps do I need to do to build lean muscles? Okay, let's see if this works, and run again. All right, and you can see we know, of course, this works, but what I want to show you is that we can see these steps. Look at this object here. I got ID, step ID, the assistant ID, and all this information. But most importantly, it also has all the things that happened. So step details, this message creation details. Let's just print that as an object itself, just the data. And let's see if we can get more. Okay, so you can see we have thread, the run steps, and all other these metadata, and when it was completed, the assistant IDs, and all this other information here that was generated, type message creation, and voila. Now, I really hope that you're seeing the whole value, the whole leverage that we get with this. Okay, so go ahead and play around with this concept, of course. As always, thank you so much, and I'll see you next. Okay, so we're making real good progress here. So now what we'll do is we're going to create yet another very awesome application here called the Current News Summarizer Assistant. So essentially it's going to be a summarizer, a new summarizer that will allow us to learn a few new things. What we're going to be using in this case is going to be the function calling tool. Now, if we go back to what we saw before when we talked about the Assistance API in the beginning, we noticed that we have the Assistance API, which taps into API models. And then in this case, it calls with specific instructions to the OpenAI model, and also can access multiple tools in parallel, which is amazing because in this tool list, we can have different things, different tools, right? So we can have code interpreter, we can have knowledge retrieval, which we'll see later.